Well, here we go, everyone. It's after further review on this Monday morning, coming off of another Cleveland Browns loss. The Browns lose to the Denver Broncos on Sunday and are now 2-6 on the season. I'm Dave DeNatale. We'll talk about it here for the next 45 minutes. And as we always do on After Further Review to kick things off, we have the voice of the Browns via phone, Jim Donovan. And Jimmy, how bad? I mean, I sit there and go, how did it get this bad? We talked about it during this week, but I didn't see any of this coming. Did you?
No, not in the long form, no. But as the weeks go by here, I mean, there are some troubling signs that this is going to get worse, I think, before it gets better, and that's really troubling. And it's unbelievable to even hear myself say those words when we had the off season that we had and the end of the regular season that we had last year. It just seemed as though we were by all the worst parts of it, having gone through the winless year and the one-win season. But this is a very, very troubling situation that we're revisiting in a very different way. We're not tanking like we did when we went winless and the one-win year. But this is very different. This is more critical, I think, because now you're getting into situations where the team is just it's not performing and it's totally distracted, and you can tell that. And sometimes, Dino, it's not football issues; it's everything else surrounding the football team. But it needs to be just football plays, good fundamentals when the game takes place on Sundays. And I think that the team is not even close to being able to compete that way because there's so much other, distractions going on, so many other distractions going on around the football team. And really, yesterday was a different kind of loss. And we know all kinds of losses here in Cleveland. They fall in different categories where you don't have enough talent, where you lose a heartbreaker. This one was totally frustrating all game long, and yet it becomes repetitive, I think, in many of the 6 losses so far this season.
Yeah, the many of the symptoms are still, they don't seem to go away. And I want to start first because it's one of the things that we were talking about up here at the desk here before we got you on the phone. Again, Jimmy, when the Browns get into the red zone or they get in short yardage situations, for some reason they've determined that it's better to not have Nick Chubb in the football game. And I can't quite figure that out and why they think that Hilliard is better to get the football in a short yardage situation. Somebody's got to explain that one to me at some point.
Yeah, I really, and the thing is that I really believe that the Browns go through a period each and every week where they try and out-clever everybody, and in the end, they really just kind of outthink themselves in a lot of these situations, and it becomes very apparent, I think, in the red zone. So, I mean, the basic fundamental thinking would be, hey, you got a running back like him, and you're 4th and 1, or you're down inside the 5-yard line, you're just going to let him pound it in, or just like you were against the Rams late in the game when you were inside the 5-yard line, and it's 1st and goal, and he's on the field, but he's out as a wide receiver. Well, the common thinking, the good football thinking would be, we're going to give it to him a couple of times, and he's going to get us to where we need to go, hopefully into the end zone. But the Browns go into it thinking of, well, they all think that we're going to go with Chubb. That would be the normal way to do it. But we're going to do it differently. We're going to run a reverse, or we're going to put Dontrell Hilliard in, or we're not going to give the ball to Chubb. And the other thing is, the Browns really want to throw the football. There's no doubt about it. They can keep saying that they want to run the ball, that that's the avenue you take when you want to win. But those, I think we're finding out through 8 games this season, those are just words. They really don't want to run the football. They want to throw the football. They want to throw it a lot. They want to throw it on 2nd down and 1, and they want to throw it on 2nd down and 17, and they want to throw the football. I think they were just intoxicated with the new wave of football going on in the NFL, and really headlined by Kansas City last year and the offense of the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, and that really kind of tickled their fancy, and they want to have that. I mean, look, they went out and got a guy that played in that offense who'll play this week for the Browns in Kareem Hunt. But really, the good football sense is that you go with the basics of football, and that is you stop the run and you run the football. And at least on the offensive side, at critical times they go against conventional thinking, but conventional thinking has a tendency to get you wins, and this clever thinking, at least in their situation, is getting them pinned with losses and field goals instead of touchdowns.
And then all of a sudden you're again, I felt this, I don't know, at halftime I'm sitting there going, this Denver team believes they can win, despite the fact they had a quarterback who had not thrown an NFL pass until yesterday. I mean, I thought Allen was terrific. I thought he managed that game well, and when he needed to make a couple of throws, he made some throws, and you're sitting there going, this kid believes he can win, and this team believes they can win.
Yeah, they did, and the thing they believe in, I think that you have to kind of look at yourself, and you can be what you want to try and become, or you can be what you are, and they're a really good defensive team, and Vic Fangio is a terrific coach on the defensive side, and he's waited a long time to become a head coach. I mean, he's 61 years old, and he finally got his first head coaching job, but before that, he really put together a lot of great defenses, the last of which was that really good defense in Chicago with the Bears last year. And I think that they realize that they struggle offensively. They're not a dynamic offensive team. They are not the team that Peyton Manning quarterbacked out there, and they're not the team probably many teams that John Elway quarterbacked out there during the heydays of the Denver Broncos. They are a really good defensive team, though. They have an excellent secondary. They have a pretty good front. They've got a good pass rusher in Von Miller. They have some young, exciting linebackers, but they really do have a great kind of system that they run defensively, and it was on center stage yesterday because they were out on the field for a ton of time. I mean, the Browns win the war of time of possession, but did little with it, obviously. But every time, it was a bend but not break defense that Denver employed. I mean, the Browns did get up and down the field in between the 20s, but once they got into that red zone, they just couldn't get those last 20 yards, except for the one touchdown pass to Jarvis Landry. So I think that the kid Allen did a great job. He managed the game. He didn't get them beat. He made a couple of throws, and they lived on big plays. But the staple for them was you have to know what gets you to the finish line as far as winning. And they realized if they're going to win, they're going to win with a great defensive effort and just get enough points offensively. And they did that yesterday. Now, they've done that defensively throughout the season. I mean, going into the game, they had lost like 3 heartbreakers on in the regular season where they got beat on last-second field goals and last-second plays that nipped them at the wire, and none more present than the week before when they lost to Indianapolis. So they knew what they were all about. And I have to tell you, Dino, on our side, I just think that the Browns look at themselves and they can explain what they're trying to do, but I don't think that they believe in it, and they certainly don't play to it. This is what we are, and we've been looking for this identity all year long, and it just isn't presenting itself.
No, and there's no chemistry either, and that's you don't feel like from when we saw them day one against the Titans to now. I don't know what their philosophy is, Jimmy. I don't know what they're like you said, they think they're trying to be a throwing team, but they're built more because with a great running back to be a running team. They've got a defense that has playmakers, but they don't make plays.
Well, they never come up with a key stop, and they haven't all season long. There is not one time that you can say the Browns defense really came up with a critical stop, because in these 6 losses, there are points in the game where they either are behind and they get back into it a little bit and they get very close and they're within 1 score. And it's at that point in time then that the defense must come up with a stop. And you can go down the games, Tennessee in the opening game when they got to within 2 points, and then they gave up the screen pass, and then that was the end of that game. New England a week ago when the Browns got to within 7 and they had the Patriots pinned back in their own territory, and they gave up a little screen pass for 59 yards, and then the Patriots went in for a score. Seattle, when they took the lead late in the game in the fourth quarter with about 9 minutes to go, and the defense, all they needed to do was come up with another stop, and they gave up a touchdown drive and gave up 3 big penalties within that drive. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And defensively, they have been a huge disappointment. And I know the offense has been a disaster over on that side. But defensively, they thought they were going to be really good with these playmakers. Good young corners, Myles Garrett into his 3rd year, Olivier Vernon coming over to be the 1-2 punch in the pass rush, and none of that has materialized because defense comes down to stops, and when the game has been sitting there in the balance, the Browns defense all season long has not been able to come up with one big stop that allows them to get back into a game or to take a game over or to preserve a lead.
The voice of the Browns, Jim Donovan's our guest here this morning on After Further Review. So I have to bring up two off-the-field things because that's the nature here of this 2019 Browns team. This morning we found out the Browns did indeed release the safety Jermaine Whitehead, who had a bad game during the game yesterday, then an even worse game on social media afterwards. And the Browns couldn't allow that to continue, clearly.
No, that really was unbelievable, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the state of the Browns right now that happens. There's a real trickle-down effect here because Jermaine Whitehead was really the star of the entire offseason for the Browns during OTAs and during minicamp. They had come up with this idea that they were going to really only play in their base defense, which they're in a lot, that they were only going to play 2 linebackers this year rather than 3 linebackers. And the reason that they were able to do that, and Steve Wilkes wanted to do it anyway, but it became accelerated because he had the type of player that he needed to be able to enforce that defense, and that was Jermaine Whitehead, because he could play kind of a hybrid type of situation where he could be a safety, but he could come up and be big enough and aggressive enough to play that kind of quasi-linebacker position, almost like a monster back that they play, kind of made famous by Greg Williams when he took the kid from Alabama, Mark Barron, and he made him that kind of player when they were with the Rams in St. Louis. Well, Whitehead was supposed to be that guy, and there were a couple of times where he played pretty well at that, and you could see through all of it and say, okay, this might work. But football-wise, that costs people jobs. And most specifically, it cost Jannard Avery a job. Yeah. And Avery then was traded this past week because the Browns kind of figured we don't need that kind of a player anymore. And Avery, who had given them a great rookie season as a pass rusher, and, the more I look at it, they needed as many pass rushers as they could get. Did 4.5 sacks last year, but he became obsolete in this defense, and mostly it was because of Whitehead. And Whitehead had a bad game yesterday, and I know through the terrible social media tweeting that went on after the game. I mean, he explained that he was playing with a broken hand, and that's why he had such a bad tackling game. But, you just that's the state of the Browns right now. You have a player, after the game that, goes on social media and gets into a nasty war of words that the team cannot accept, and that will have a ripple effect again in the locker room right now. Nothing good as far as chemistry is going on. There's a lot of bad chemistry going on with this football team, and it goes from the locker room and it goes out onto the field on Sundays, and that's what we're seeing. The end result is that at the end of these games, you're seeing a team that is going in about 10 different directions. And definitely, it's not I want the Browns of the last 8 games last year. Those were my Browns. Yeah. And those were the Browns of a lot of people that made us very happy and so optimistic and really proud of the way that they played. And there were a lot of guys on my Browns and your Browns of last year, those last 8 games, that we really pulled for and were excited for. And either those particular guys aren't playing the same way or they're not here in the first place. But I miss those Browns.
Yeah, I'd like them back. I mean, right now would be nice. The other thing was the shoe episode, and I bring it up because I was on a national radio show last night, and that was one of the first things they brought up with me is that, Odell Beckham obviously knows what the uniform code of conduct is for the NFL because he's had issues with the visor and the watch and everything, and Landry does too. But clearly, Jimmy, these guys don't care. They want to test the limit of how much the NFL is going to enforce it, and the NFL is not going to give these guys a break, especially not Beckham.
No, but it's a really stupid situation. I mean, think of the things that we are putting up with right now. I mean, just, yesterday it's cleats. A few weeks, the opening week of the season or the second game of the season, it's a visor. Then it's a wristwatch. Yeah. This is a lot of outside noise that the football team doesn't need. I mean, they really don't. I mean, this is really a very, very bad situation that's going on right now. Can you imagine after watching that first half, yesterday, and the difficulties that the Browns had in trying to score and get over the finish line and get into the end zone and score a touchdown, and they're losing, and knowing the critical state going into the game of where the Browns were going on their season, and a guy knocks on the door. You have 13 minutes to try and make adjustments during an NFL halftime situation, and a guy from the league knocks on the door and says, "Hey, the two wide receivers can't wear those cleats." I mean, there were a lot more important things that needed to be solved than rather getting a shoe replacement situation. And that says it all, Dino, what's going on. None of this is really good. It really isn't good. So I know that you take on a lot of salary when you take on players like Odell Beckham Jr., and you take on a lot of situations where you say, hey, we got to get him the football. But you're taking on a lot of stupid situations right now that are becoming such a distraction at a point where this football team has trouble concentrating on just lining up the proper way, never mind executing a play. But that is just bizarre. But that's the 2019 Cleveland Browns right now. So disappointing.
Let me leave you with this. This was a tweet I got before we got on the air from I Teach, from Bernie Nofel. He says, I think this year's Browns team, talented, underachieving, self-absorbed, apathetic, me-first loser mentality is one of the hardest to root for in my 50-plus years of being a fan. Cleveland deserves better.
I couldn't agree with him more. I really can't agree with him more. It's funny, as you read that, I said to, a couple of the other members of the media that when you're standing in the locker room after a game or on a Wednesday afternoon, as you get set for the game the following week, that upcoming Sunday when the Browns have their busy media day, it's a very tough team to like right now. And even guys that you liked in the past are very different. They've changed. And so far, as you can look at 2-6 and you say, well, they haven't changed for the better. I mean, they have changed. And it just seems as though there are 5 or 6 different groups within that locker room. And I'm sure there are petty jealousies going on. And I'm sure there's a lot of grumbling going on right now at the me situation of I'm not getting the ball, they're not doing the right thing, I'm not playing, they're not putting me in a position to win at the right time. It really is a tough team to love right now. It's a tough team to like right now. It's a tough team, and the test is going to be for those people that plunked down a lot of money, that bought into the situation that this was going to be a very exciting football season and special football season. The tough thing is now, as the weather turns here and we come home for 3 games in a row at home, hoping at least that they're going to turn this thing around in some way, fashion, or form, it's going to be a tough situation, a real test to, do I really want to go down there and watch this and pull for them right now, because they really haven't given the fans a great deal to be optimistic about, to be happy about, to be excited about, to be committed about, and that's a real problem. That's a problem that should go from, top to bottom in Berea, that I'm sure they have to be concerned about that. I know they are. It's tough to make big changes midstream, but so far this has been a very, very, very disappointing season.
Indeed. All right, Jimmy, we'll look forward to seeing you later on tonight, 6 o'clock on What Matters Most, 7 o'clock on the front row, and try to sort all this out. I mean, this is unbelievable that we're having these conversations through the first 8 games of the season, but that's the reality.
It is. Thanks, Dino.
Thank you, Jimmy. Jim Donovan, the voice of the Browns, joining us this morning on After Further Review. That tweet from Bernie, to me, so spot on. I read it to Brian Crane, our director and producer, before we got started with Jimmy. I just think that was so spot on. I mean, this is a team that for all the talent in the world, and John, I mean, give General Manager John Dorsey the credit. He assembled a team that has lots of talent. There's no denying that. But when you can't come together as a team, when you have players who are, as Jimmy says, you're in 5 or 6 different cliques right now and different groupings. You've got guys who are a little bit more concerned about me and a little less concerned about the we. Makes it a hard team to like. And I think Jimmy's point is right on. The Buffalo Bills are coming to town on Sunday. I could see all of a sudden, and this is again something we didn't think we would see this year, but I could see us see more Bills fans than Browns fans. The Bills are 6-2. They feel like they have a good shot at the playoffs. And then on a Thursday night, you've got the Pittsburgh Steelers coming to town. Well, we know what that's like when, Browns fans leave early and in fourth quarters they're dominated by black and gold. I mean, I didn't think we'd have any of these kinds of discussions this year, but that's where we are reality-wise. Our Twitter question this morning, you can tweet at me at Dino Cleveland, and we've also retweeted it at WKYC. What is your Browns mindset today after Sunday's loss to Denver? Now, on Twitter, I gave you 4 options. On Facebook Live, well, you can basically put whatever you want to put. But on Facebook Live, here's what you got. 44%, let me give you the options first. I'm not giving up, fire the coach, we're on to the 2020 draft, which some people said yesterday on Twitter, and how did it get this bad? 44% are just wondering, how did it get this bad? 36% of you think the Browns need to fire the coach. 11% say, I'm on to the draft. 9%, I'm not giving up. That's a lot of you who have already said, I can't, you know what, I can't deal it. I can't deal with it. Where did this go wrong? Jim says here on Facebook, I'll get Matt Florjancic up here in a couple minutes here, but I want to read a couple of these posts. Jim Trott says, I like Freddie, don't get me wrong. I've supported him since his promotion, but I'm a big believer in the if it ain't broke, don't fix it theory, and I felt we should have kept Greg Williams and continued the chemistry and success we had with him as head coach and Freddie as offensive coordinator. I think whoever made the decision is the one to blame if unable to turn this thing around. Just way too much talent on this team to be struggling this much late in the season. Well, I mean, Jim, that's John Dorsey, that's Jimmy and Dee Haslam. They're the ones who decided that, look, we want to open it up for, a bunch of interviews for coaches. And, it was obvious. I think with the fact that Freddie was getting the last interview, I think it was pretty obvious that he was going to be the guy. The fact that they didn't go after a Bruce Arians or a Mike McCarthy, I think that's something we have to really look at, the types of coaches the Browns were trying to interview. Matt, jump on in here. Therese says, discipline. The thing that she's thinking about the most with the Browns this morning. We may have talented players, but do we have smart, honorable players? I don't think so. Discipline. At one point yesterday, I tweeted that, no discipline. Sheldon Richardson got called, and I don't care if it's a borderline call or not. He got called for the roughing the passer. At one point, it looked like they were about to get called for a 3rd and 2 for offsides. It came very close. It ended up going as a false start to Denver, but it just shows you lack of discipline. Andrew says the same thing. Lack of discipline, and don't forget that offensive line. Ray Douglas says 5 and 11. WKYC.com digital sports writer Matt Florjancic now joins me.
Morning, Dino.
Good morning, my friend. I am just still shaking myself saying this has got to be a nightmare. This can't be what we're talking about halfway into a Cleveland Browns season, but you and I have done this long enough to know.
This is actually late by the Browns standards.
Yes.
Sometimes. Usually we're talking about firing a coach in like mid-October, so...
Yeah.
Maybe there's one sign of improvement.
Maybe there, yeah.
Trying to find a bright spot on a Monday morning.
Okay, let's begin with that point. Is there somebody asked me last night when I was doing this national radio interview, could I see the Browns firing Freddie Kitchens, like in the next couple hours, next couple days? The only way I could see it happening is if John Dorsey went to him and said, hey, look, I think you're overextending yourself as the play caller and the head coach. You got to give up being the play caller. And Freddie says, well, I'm not going to do it. I'm done. Other than that, I don't see them firing the head coach right now.
I would agree with you on all points. I think the mandate needs to be made from John Dorsey to Freddie Kitchens because it's gone on far too long.
Yeah.
And clearly he's overmatched on game day. He just has too much to do. He can't manage the game and successfully call plays. We've seen it all year. He was a great play caller over the second half of last year. That was his only job.
Right.
Now he has a different job. and now he's trying to still do his old job. If you want to be a coordinator, be a coordinator. That's fine. You want to be a head coach, manage the team.
Yeah.
Make sure that your team is disciplined enough to step onto an NFL field. Don't be worried about dress code violations. Don't be worried about pre-snap penalties midway through the year. Just manage the team. Manage expectations. Manage egos. That's your job as the head coach. The very best head coaches may be able to handle coordinator duties as well, but even they know when to delegate.
Right.
Bill Belichick is probably the best example. You know, he takes over a game, he manages a game.
Mm-hmm.
And
He's a great defensive mind,
right?
But he's had defensive coordinators,
right? When he has to step in, he will. Mm-hmm. But he trusts his coaches to call the correct plays because they know the system. Nobody knows the system because it's a first year, and realistically, what they ran last year to so much success versus what they've run this year is like they've tried to integrate too much creativity in the offense instead of just doing the simple things correctly.
Well, and
focus on getting the small things right.
That's, if you're trying to diagnose what's changed offensively between last year and this year. Yes, I know Njoku's hurt, but really, Matt,
if David Njoku was the linchpin of this season,
right, and same thing. Kevin Zeitler
was the linchpin of this season.
Right,
we were doomed before we started.
Right. To me, I mean, the offensive line as a group isn't playing as well as it did last year. I think we overestimated how good they were. But the other thing is the discipline, because you're putting yourselves too often in 2nd and 15, 1st and 20 with the penalties. And yes, I think they only made 5 or 6 yesterday.
5 penalties for 40 yards.
5 penalties. I mean, that's better.
That's a marked improvement.
That's a marked improvement. But penalties. You can argue. You certainly could have beaten both the Seattle Seahawks and the Tennessee Titans if you'd had 5 penalties or less in those 2 games. And, there's no discipline. There was, at least last year, the Browns were a disciplined football team, both sides, offense and defense. You don't feel that right now.
And that came from the mindset of their interim head coach. Greg Williams was focused on not beating himself.
Right.
And not letting the Browns beat themselves. And it resulted in a 5-3 record and relatively good play throughout the season. I mean, it could have been a 6-2 record had they not started in such a bad way at Baltimore in the season finale, and they would have finished above the 500 mark. Exact opposite this year. We've got guys worried about visors, worried about cleats, worried about specialized cleats. So Odell said yesterday in his postgame, oh, well, I work, in the summertime I go to Nike and we set up a schedule of what cleats I'm going to wear. Nike has been a league partner for long enough to know what is permissible as well. Why are you even trying to, you're just, at that point, you're just trying to sell shoes and you're putting Odell in a bad spot.
Yeah, you're selling, and you're trolling the league. And the league's not going to, the league has zero tolerance right now on anything Beckham wears. I mean, that is not in code.
And he's facing probably another fine. It was reported last night that he's facing potentially another fine because, once again, he didn't have pants that covered his knees. Thus, he's not wearing the knee pads, which is another violation. It's something he's already been fined for. It should not be it should not be this hard to look. You have former NFL players whose sole job it is to stand on the sidelines and write down uniform violations. Before the game, they talk to players who are in violation and they tell them to correct it. It is not that difficult to correct things as basic as dress code violations. The rules have been around for a long time. These are 6-year wide receivers. They should know better, and we should not be talking about this. This should not. Want to wear whatever you want to wear in pregame. I don't care. When it comes time to the game, don't be the distraction. Don't give us another thing to talk about after the game that has nothing to do with football.
Well, and then that's a good rant.
I did not mean to.
No, that was good. No, that's all right. That was a good rant. And 2-6 football teams have that, and they also have Jermaine Whitehead, and
My feeling on it, number one, is if you're playing, if you can't tackle with a broken hand, you shouldn't be playing. That's
Right.
number one. But obviously, the depths of hate that were coming from social media from him yesterday were just unacceptable, and the Browns could not let that go. And I mean, did actually the right thing today by releasing him.
Yeah, credit to the Browns for stepping up and doing two right things in this situation. PR got him out of the locker room before he could make the situation worse by talking to the media. Then today they part ways with him.
Yep.
And I think those two things are a sign that at least something might be headed in the right direction. It was unacceptable what he did. And I applaud him for playing through a broken hand. It's not an easy thing to play hurt. I get it. But there was no need for that level of vitriol that came out after the game. Nothing good. I don't know what he thought was going to be positive about that, what good was going to come out of that. I think it was just a guy who was venting frustration and at that point did not care what happened to him.
Right. And so the consequences is he's out of a job.
Yeah, that's life. You have to be accountable for what you put out on social media. And no matter how many times we hear, oh, I didn't mean to say it that way or this, that, and the third.
Got taken out of context.
Yeah, it got taken out of context. When you put something out on social media and you are accepting tacitly or understandably the responsibility that comes with those comments. Yes, there is free speech in this country, but there also are consequences regardless of what you say, good, bad, or indifferent. And something needed to be done, and the Browns moved on from. This is a guy that throughout the offseason, Steve Wilkes, Freddie Kitchens, his teammates, talked about how great of a leader he was and how he was never a defensive captain, but he was a great leader. I remember Steve Wilkes, after a practice, said he basically could be a defensive captain because he has that kind of leadership abilities.
And Jimmy just said they one of the things that they did this year was kind of design the defense around him a little bit with only, a lot of formations only going to two linebackers because of Whitehead. It's one of the reasons why Jannard Avery's not on the team anymore.
Yep. And now you look at it, and Mac Wilson's been pressed into service in recent weeks. Joe Schobert's still man in the middle. We might be seeing our first extended glimpse at Taki playing meaningful defensive snaps.
I would think.
Because we're running out of linebackers.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't know that you can run a 4-2-5 if you don't have that third safety on the field. And I don't know who that would be because they're already thin enough at safety with Murray and Randall still working their way back from injuries. Randall with a hamstring. We all know how long it takes soft tissue injuries to heal.
Ask Misters Ward and Williams about that.
Yeah, four games missed for each of those guys. So yeah, I'm not surprised they made the move, but there are a lot of corresponding moves that have to go along with it. And like I said, we might see a pretty dramatic shift in defensive alignment come Sunday against the Bills. But it was the right thing to do.
But it was the right thing to do. Offensively, and I asked Jimmy about this too, I don't understand how the Browns, when they're doing their personnel groupings, think that it's a better play for them in a short yardage situation or a red zone situation to not have Nick Chubb in there on back-to-back downs, third down, fourth down, third and short, fourth and short. And this has happened several times now.
Yeah. It's been a pattern that developed actually from the regular season opener when they had a goal-to-go situation.
And they gave it to Hilliard.
They took Chubb out, and Hilliard is actually the one who scored the first Browns touchdown.
As Kevin Harlan called him yesterday, Hilliard.
Yeah. I don't understand how Nick Chubb could be the bell cow to get you to the 20, but then once you get there, it doesn't work anymore. We have to go with something else. You're outthinking the process. You're overthinking the need to change up and be less predictable. Here's the thing. You put Nick Chubb on the field at 4th and 1, regardless of if it's predictable or not, you still make the defense account for him.
Right.
Because he is a road grading back that can run over people. So now you put the doubt in the defense's mind, hey, maybe they are going to run it with Nick Chubb, and we have to key in on the running back, at least use him as a decoy if you want to run a quarterback sneak. You have him on the field. Make the defense account for him.
Make him
I
respect
don't
him.
understand why we continue. I mean, we saw Dontrell Hilliard a lot last night.
Yes.
And Dontrell's a good ball player, don't get me wrong, but with Kareem Hunt coming back into the fold this week, it seemed like we were showcasing him for a deal when there's no deal to be made because the trade deadline passed. It didn't seem like the greatest personnel groupings, and ultimately we saw the results of a couple turnovers on downs there.
Last thing here before we get out of here on After Further Review, Matt Florjancic, kind enough to spend a few minutes with us here before he heads to Berea, what should be a
it's going to be fun today.
Very interesting day.
It's going to be a fun day.
Baker Mayfield. This isn't going to affect his swagger and his air of confidence that he has. Yeah. Whether the Browns are 6-2 or 2-6, he believes in himself. He has a chip on his shoulder. He likes having a chip on his shoulder. That's not going to change. But again, he's got to play better. And there were plays to be made yesterday. And certainly the Beckham being open when the Browns are down by 5 points and he throws it in the double coverage in the middle of the field to Landry. He's got to play better. And I mean, we've said that now for this first half of the season. Well, if the offensive line would block better, then maybe Baker would play better. I know he didn't turn it over, but he has to. There are throws. I think Jimmy put it last night. He's throwing fastballs when all he needs to do is throw soft tosses in many cases. He's got to be better.
Yeah, and he addressed that very thing after the game last night when he was asked about changing up his throwing mechanics. He said, look, my teammates were telling me it was coming out a little bit too strong, so I backed off a little bit. So he recognized that a change needed to be made. He made an in-game adjustment, which I don't know the last Cleveland team that was smart enough to make an in-game adjustment.
It's been a while.
It's been a while. But yeah, he knows he needs to get better. And he didn't have a bad day yesterday, but he didn't have a great day either.
Right.
I'm working on our weekly Baker Mayfield report, and the headline is going to be no turnovers, yet no big plays.
Right. I mean, he was outplayed by a guy, who made plays who had never taken an NFL snap.
Yeah, I think we were all a little concerned about that because the record isn't nearly as bad as you would expect for guys making their first starts over the last 5 years. Now 17 wins by those quarterbacks and 43 starts, so inching ever closer to that 500 mark, which I think is pretty admirable. But when there's not enough film on a guy, other than his college film and some preseason games with the Rams and the Jaguars, it becomes difficult to game plan, and he is going to make a few plays that you didn't see coming. Mm-hmm. The problem is he made too many, and the Browns weren't able to combat that.
Yeah, just couldn't get any stops. All right, well, listen, again, we've got a lot of coverage on the Browns at WKYC.com. Matt will be out in Berea later today. Baker Mayfield report's coming up in a little bit. I don't know where this team goes from here, but as Jim Mora once said, playoffs? Yeah. Playoffs? You kidding me? I don't think we're. Yeah, we're off of that train.
As fellow sports writer Ben Axelrod and I discussed last night on our post-game show, we maybe set the bar too high, and maybe the Browns did too. Maybe we just needed to make an incremental improvement before we started talking about Super Bowl or bust.
Right.
I think everybody overestimated what this team was capable of, and we didn't see all these distractions, headaches, and the like coming down the pike. We didn't see it, and shame on us. We probably should have.
Well, yeah, I know. Something Jimmy said last week to me as we were looking ahead to this game, but I asked him why the Browns, offense and Beckham didn't seem to be in sync, and Jimmy's point was like, hey, listen, he wasn't around for OTAs, came from minicamp, but he wasn't here for OTAs. They didn't really work him in the preseason, this is what you expect. They thought that they could just get on the field at First Energy Stadium on September 6th, flip the light switch on, and everything would be, roses and unicorns. And, that it's unfortunate that, that's not the case.
If week one didn't get it through their heads that you can't just roll the ball out there and walk over people in this league, nothing's going to get through them this season.
Nope.
And that's just the bottom line.
And this will be a lost season.
They got embarrassed on their home turf because they were undisciplined and in the wrong spots. And what are we still talking about 8 weeks later? Undisciplined, being in the wrong spots, not making plays at critical times in games. Now, they cleaned up a couple mistakes. They did not make a turnover yesterday or commit a turnover, and they were only flagged for 5 penalties. That's great. That's moving it in the right direction. What's going to get it over the hump?
Right.
What is going to take this season, over the struggles and move on to something that's, we've all talked about, which was trying to continue this season into January. We thought we were potentially heading for postseason play in January, meaningful games in December, and now it looks like we could very well be on the way to another coaching search, which would be the 10th since the Browns returned in 1999, and it'll be the 5th under D and Jimmy Haslam since they took ownership of this team in October of 2012.
I mean, Matt, unless they go like 6-2 or 7-1 in the last 8 games, I don't know if I see any other.
I'd argue that they probably have to run the table and go 8-0 to even be in the discussion for the division, and I don't know that anybody's slowing down Baltimore at this point.
But no,
Baltimore had a great game last night.
For us not to be talking a coaching change in January.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, you better be winning 6 or 7 of these last 8 games.
You have to finish above 500.
Yeah.
I think that's at or above 500, I should say. If you go 8-8, you rescue the season and go 6-2 over these last 8 weeks, I could see the argument to be made that they played better. But here's the thing I would caution you against. For all season long, we talked about how easy the second half of the schedule was. If the Browns come out and play well over the second half, what have we really learned about this team?
Right.
Where are we going?
Right.
We learned that we can be good enough to compete with the good teams, but we're going to make a ton of mistakes that add up to a loss in the end.
Right.
So, and honestly, you can't expect to win in the postseason if you can't beat the likes of the Patriots, of the Ravens, of the Rams, and of the Seahawks, because those are the exact teams you're going to be playing in January, if you're lucky enough to get there, which at this point looks like a remote long shot.
Yeah, big time. Okay, that's going to do it for us here for After Further Review. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. Again, we've got our Twitter poll up at WKYC on Twitter and at Dino Cleveland. For Matt Florjancic, for Brian Crane, and for Jim Donovan, I'm Dave DeNatale. Thanks for watching After Further Review right here on WKYC.com, Facebook Live, and YouTube.